Benedicite Dominus, and welcome to question 23 of the Secunda Secundae. The topic for this lecture is charity in itself. We are beginning a new section of the Summa on charity. It's 23 questions long, starting on question 23, and it should be pretty interesting. In charity is where St. Thomas really comes up with some innovative new ideas, and it makes it some of the most important parts of the Summa. However, it also makes it sometimes slightly more complicated than other sections of the Summa, so hopefully we can follow through. Let us first look at a definition of charity by St. Augustine. St. Augustine says, "By charity I mean the movement of the soul towards the enjoyment of God for his own sake." This becomes a very important definition for us. This is the one that St. Thomas uses throughout this section. It's a movement of the soul. That's an important element of this, as you'll see in the first few questions. And it's for the sake of enjoying God for his own sake. Now this is, part one and part two. For his own sake is a very interesting element, right? This is not loving God for heaven. This is not hope for the attainment of everlasting happiness, as hope is. It's not belief in truth. This is love of God for his own sake, right? What does that sound like, to love someone for their own sake? Well, we're starting the conversation about friendship with God, right? We're talking about friendship, not loving them for ourselves, but for their own sake. What can we give to God? Well, very little we can give to God. But what we can give is love for its own sake, for his own sake. This is a particularly interesting piece, right? Now let us look at the first article, which is charity is friendship. So this is right at the heart of the matter, isn't it? So question is, what is friendship? St. Thomas says it's love plus benevolence, which is well-wishing and hoping the best for another, equals friendship. So there's a love plus well-wishing for the sake of the other, right? It's not selfish, it's for the sake of another. The opposite of friendship, which involves love, would be concupiscence, right? Some element of concupiscence, where I could say, well, I love wine, or I love horses, or I love to go on vacation, I love to travel, right? This is also love, but it's not well-wishing for the sake of another. It's love for what I like, right? So this is concupiscence. This is different. There's no element of friendship when it comes to loving things because I love them, because I want them, right? Somewhat different. When we're dealing with friendship, which is in the sphere of charity, right? What type of love is charity? Friendship type of love, right? It involves some type of communication. Now, St. Thomas points out that in terms of external communication, we don't have a very good form of external communication with God and the angels, because we can talk and they don't talk back, right? So communication in that regard is a breakdown of communication. Meister Eckhart says, nothing so much resembles God as silence. Right? God's not very good at communication when we speak out loud. But then there is also internal communication, which would be internal prayer, right? Praying and meditating. And in this way, God does communicate with us through our discernment and our prayers, right? Although even within this internal prayer, right, internal communication, we're still dealing with the level of imperfection, right? It's never a perfect conversation with God, even in our minds, right? How much of those voices are our own ego? How much of it is the devil? How much of it is God? Difficult to know. If you can navigate that, you've reached higher planes of the spiritual life, right? When you can discern the voices. But in heaven, we get the perfect voice of God, right? Perfect communication with God. But that type of charity, friendship, involves some level of communication. Right? We can't have God as a friend if we don't communicate, even imperfectly. The next article is maybe the hardest one of these 8 articles, and this is that charity is created in the soul. Now, St. Thomas says, as the soul is immediately united to the body, right, the soul is united to the body, so charity is united to the soul. Meaning that they're inseparable, right? That they are essential characters. And as charity is a movement of the soul towards the enjoyment of God, right? The definition from St. Augustine, it's a movement of the soul. It's created in the soul. So charity is created in the soul, since it moves the soul to the enjoyment of God, right? So in some ways this is somewhat complicated, but in other ways St. Thomas relies on St. Augustine as the master, and we rely on St. Thomas. So and we take their word for it. Article 3 is charity a virtue? And I think that's fairly clear that if faith is a virtue, hope is a virtue, charity will also be a virtue, as St. Paul points out in 1 Corinthians 13, faith, hope, and love, they go together. From St. Augustine, they say, charity is a virtue which, when our affections are perfectly ordered, right, our passions, our attractions, right, are perfectly ordered, it unites us to God, for by it we love him, right? So charity, when charity is the form, we get this at the end, the last articles, when charity is the form of our actions, the form of our virtues, and charity guides our life, guides our virtues, it aims at God himself. Right? It aims at the love of God himself. It aims to that friendship with God. Right? Charity directs justice, prudence, right? Fortitude. It directs all of the virtues towards friendship with God. Right? So therefore, charity is a virtue. Both charity and virtue aim at attaining God. Right? So charity aims at enjoying God, right? The enjoyment of God, and virtue aims at the good which comes from God, right? So they both aim at attaining God. This next question is a bit of a tough one, because is charity a special virtue? Now, this isn't something that was asked previously in the other theological virtues, but this is asked of charity. It's often asked within the cardinal virtues as well. Is this a special virtue? Well, a special virtue is not a general virtue. A general virtue is what's needed in all things. So, as an example, all the other virtues depend on prudence. Therefore, prudence is in all other virtues. And that way you would think, well, isn't charity in all other virtues? That's why this one's a bit tough, right? It's good for discussion. But St. Thomas says it is a special kind of virtue, right? Because it aims at loving God for God's own sake, right? That's not like prudence. That's not like the other virtues. It's not like hope. So it is unique. It's special. However, charity perfects all other virtues. It's the mother of virtues, right? St. Thomas calls it. So as the mother of virtues, it is certainly in all virtues, right? Similarly, prudence or justice, right? The virtues are very interrelated. It's hard to be deep in one virtue and completely absent in another, right? They all are good and true, so they all aim at something, but charity is also special and unique compared to other virtues, right? If it wasn't really, it wouldn't have a different name, right? Well, the next question is charity one virtue or several virtues? Now, this one might be confusing for some people, because anyone who's aware of basic theology might say, well, we have agape, we have philia, right? We have eros. We have these different types of love, right? So there are many different types of love, right? There should be many species of love. Well, St. Thomas says, no, not in this regard, right? Charity is a type of love, right? Greek only has Greek has many words, English only has one word, but charity is a type of love. However, it is not divided into these other kinds. This type of love is specific. It's aimed at man's friendship with God, right? So then it's not agape, it's not eros, it's not philia. It's not another type of love. This is a unique type of love, which is friendship with God. It's undivided. There are no species. The goal, the end of this, the specific nature of charity is aimed at the goodness of God and everlasting happiness, right? So these are unique elements that are not like eros or philia, right? This is its own type of love, and the principal object of charity is God, right? Say love of God, love of neighbor. Well, principally God, right? You love your neighbor. Secondarily, you love your neighbor in God because of the divine spark within our neighbor, because of the divine command, because we can see Christ in them. But principally, charity is love of God, not love of neighbor. The next article is charity the most excellent virtue? And the answer is obviously yes, right? From first letter to the Corinthians, the greatest of these is love, right? Faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love, right? If we break it down, well, what is faith about? Faith is about God's truth, right? The truth about God, right? Hope is about God's goodness, right? Everlasting happiness, obtaining everlasting happiness. This is dealing with God's goodness. Well, charity isn't dealing with truth and goodness, it's dealing with God himself. So, since this is dealing with friendship with God himself for his own sake, right? This is the enjoyment of God. This is entirely at another level, right? So therefore charity is above faith and hope, because it's not about God, it is God, right? That's the object. Now, is there virtue without charity, right? Can you have a virtue without charity? This is an interesting one, right? I think this is a good one for a conversation if you're using this in class, because it would be, if you say there is no virtue without charity, then you can say charity is the loving God for God's own sake and the enjoyment of God. Well, what would an atheist do then, right? Well, what's a virtue that an atheist might like? Well, justice, for example, right? You can see a lot of people who are atheists who talk about justice. Well, can you strive for justice if you don't have charity, right? Love of God. Well, that's an interesting question, right? You would almost think, yes, you can love justice without, you can seek justice without loving God. But St. Thomas says, not really. Not really. He says, he quotes the first letter to the Corinthians, if I should distribute all my goods to the poor, and if I should deliver my body to be burned, but I have not charity, it profit me nothing, right? Profit me nothing, right? You can seek social justice, you can seek all these other things. If you don't have charity, it profits you nothing. There is no merit in it. There is no virtue in it, right? Anything good you do is fruitless, right? This is the Thomistic understanding of this. The ultimate good of charity is God. The proximate good, now this one's interesting. Right, so the ultimate good is God, but the proximate good are other things other than God, right? Love of neighbor might be a proximate good. It's a good on its way to the final good, right? If things are done correctly, a proximate good is on its way, right? It's a secondary good, but it's not in competition with the final good, or the ultimate good, which is God. Now there can be proximate goods in two ways, right? St. Thomas likes these two and then two and two more, right? There's true good, right? True proximate good, which is the proper ordering of society, the proper ordering of things, right? There's God, and then there's everything else. So of everything else, properly ordering it to its true good is good, right? That's charity and it's virtue. Now, if you only have the appearance of good, right, then it's not really good. It's not really virtuous. And I think this is where St. Thomas is making a distinction about charity. So you can aim at virtue, but without charity is probably an apparent good. Like on the surface it looks good, but deep down it's not truly virtue. It's not meritorious, right? If you take something like racial justice, well, if you do it with God, you see the dignity of the human person as a fellow created being. You see the spark of the divine within people of various races, right? You see Christ in them, and you see them as your brother, right, in the body of Christ. This is virtue, right? This is virtue. When you feed them, you feed the suffering Christ, right? This is virtue. If it's just equality for equality's sake, then it appears good, but it's not. It doesn't have the depth. It doesn't have the merit. It doesn't have the virtue behind it. And some people have argued that society will eventually fall apart if you don't have this charity as the essential element that binds it together, right? If you just have the appearance of virtue, but it's not rooted in charity, eventually it will all fall apart. And I think we see that a little bit in our modern society, where we have virtue, but ultimately it doesn't stand on its own if you don't have charity backing it. Now we're in the last article, which is the form of the virtues. Is charity the form of the virtues? Yes. And this is very Aristotelian that St. Thomas is using. Charity orders all virtues to their final end. So the final cause, I should have put the final cause. Final cause, the ordering to the proper end. Charity orders the virtues to their final end, right? That's proper. It is the form of the virtues. Then there is the efficient cause, right? Charity sets into motion, sets into action everything in its proper way, like a carpenter who makes a table, right? He builds it, right? The efficient cause is the builder, right? So charity is like the builder of the virtues. Right? It is also, he says, the material cause. Material virtues don't have a material. Well, he says it's like the foundation, right? The foundation of the house is charity. So all virtues are built on the foundation of charity. So it's the material cause of charity, of virtues. And the final cause, right? Again, the thing that you are aiming at, the teleology of this is charity, right? The final end is God, friendship with God, and all the virtues are ordered to it. Therefore, charity gives order to the rest of the virtues. This is why in Article 7 you would say, without charity, the other virtues aren't really possible, right? Because they wouldn't have a foundation, they wouldn't have a creator, and they wouldn't have a final end, right? Without those three elements, you wouldn't have very much, right? It gives the form, right? It gives the form. The four causes are covered. Now, in conclusion, charity is friendship. Charity is friendship with God. Charity is created in the soul. It's moved in the soul. It's created in the soul. Charity is a virtue. Right? Charity is a special virtue. It directs the other virtues. It's the mother of all virtues. Charity is one virtue. Right? There are many types of love, but this particular type of love is friendship with God, the enjoyment of God. Charity is the most excellent virtue. It guides all the other virtues. No virtue can exist without charity, and charity gives form, and it's the four causes of all virtues, right? Okay, I hope you found this interesting. I changed up the format a little bit, and I actually made it shorter. So I hope that is helpful for anyone who's watching these videos. Okay, have a great day.